Remove him from the ceremony. The words cut through the cold morning air just as the first notes of a military bugle echoed across Arlington Ridge Memorial Cemetery. Hundreds of mourners stood beneath a gray Virginia sky. Rows of white folding chairs stretched across the manicured lawn. American flags fluttered gently beside a casket draped in red, white, and blue. The funeral of General Robert Hayes had drawn senators, decorated officers, television crews, and veterans from every corner of the country. Yet the man everyone was staring at was not seated among them. He stood quietly near the back gate with his 11-year-old daughter beside him. Ethan Walker wore a weathered brown jacket instead of a formal uniform. The jacket had faded from years of work and countless winters. His boots carried traces of dust from a long drive across 3 states. Nothing about him looked important. Nothing about him suggested that he belonged among generals and dignitaries. A young security officer stepped forward and raised a hand. "Sir, this funeral is restricted to approved guests." Ethan nodded politely. "I understand. Then I'll need you to leave." The officer's voice remained professional, but firm. Several nearby attendees glanced over. Some frowned. Others simply looked away. In places where rank and status mattered, appearances often spoke louder than truth. Beside him, Lily tightened her grip on his hand. Her small black dress shifted in the breeze. "Dad?" she whispered, looking up at him. "Why won't they let us in?" Ethan looked toward the distant casket. For a moment, his eyes lingered on the American flag folded perfectly across its surface. Then he gave his daughter a calm smile. "Sometimes people can't see the whole story right away." Lily frowned but nodded. She had learned long ago that her father rarely complained. He never argued when life was unfair. He simply carried himself with quiet dignity and kept moving forward. The officer spoke again. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you one last time." Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. He didn't mention the thousands of miles he had driven to be there. He didn't explain why he had marked this date on his calendar nearly a year ago. He simply stood there, steady and respectful, as if leaving was the least important thing in the world. Around them, the funeral procession continued. Black vehicles arrived one after another. Officers in dress uniforms exchanged solemn greetings. Reporters adjusted cameras near the entrance. No one noticed the promise that had brought Ethan there. No one knew why he had come. And no one could have guessed that the quiet single father standing outside the gate carried a connection to General Hayes that would soon stop the entire ceremony. As the wind rolled across the cemetery and the bugle's mournful notes faded into silence, a distant convoy of black vehicles appeared at the top of the hill. Within minutes, everything was about to change. The convoy remained distant, little more than a line of black vehicles moving slowly along the winding road beyond the cemetery gates. But Ethan barely noticed it. His attention stayed fixed on the flag-covered casket standing nearly 200 yards away beneath a white canopy. The morning breeze carried faint echoes of conversation across the lawn. Politicians shook hands. Officers exchanged respectful nods. Reporters adjusted microphones. Life continued as though nothing unusual was happening. Yet for Ethan Walker, this day had been marked in his heart long before any public announcement had ever been made. Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. "Dad, was General Hayes your friend?" Ethan looked down at her. The question lingered between them for a moment. Then he smiled softly. "Something like that." "Did he know Mom?" she asked. Ethan's eyes drifted briefly toward the distant hills beyond the cemetery. "No, sweetheart." But he knew what it meant to keep going when life got hard. Lily seemed to think about that. She was old enough to understand loss, but still young enough to believe every story had a happy ending. "Then why did you never tell me about him?" Ethan let out a slow breath. "Some people leave a mark on your life that is hard to explain. You carry it with you. You do not always talk about it." Nearby, 2 older veterans sitting on a bench watched the exchange. One of them noticed the faded military bearing in Ethan's posture, the straight shoulders, the calm eyes, the habit of always scanning his surroundings without appearing to. He leaned toward his friend. "That man served." The other nodded quietly. "You can tell." But neither man recognized him. Very few people would have. Time had a way of hiding extraordinary stories beneath ordinary lives. A gust of wind swept across the cemetery, rustling the trees that lined the memorial grounds. Ethan slipped a hand into his jacket pocket and felt the folded paper resting there. The edges had softened with age. He had carried it for years. Through job changes. Through lonely nights after losing his wife. Through every challenge of raising Lily on his own. Some people carried photographs. Ethan carried a promise. The security officer approached again, looking uncomfortable now. "Sir, I really do not want to make this difficult." Ethan nodded. "I know. The guest list came directly from military command. I understand." The officer hesitated. Something about Ethan's calmness made the situation feel strangely backward. Most people would have argued by now. Most people would have demanded explanations. Ethan didn't either. He simply remained where he was, respectful and patient. "Can I ask why this matters so much to you?" The officer finally said. Ethan looked toward the casket once more. His expression never changed. "Because 15 years ago, a man asked me to be here." The officer waited for more. None came. Ethan returned to silence. And as the distant convoy rolled closer, glinting beneath the pale morning sun, the first hints of confusion began spreading among the officers near the entrance. Someone important had arrived. Very important. Yet none of them knew that the person they were preparing to welcome had come for a reason none of them would ever expect. The approaching convoy drew more attention with every passing second. Uniformed personnel near the entrance adjusted their posture. Conversations faded. Camera crews turned their lenses toward the road. Yet Ethan remained exactly where he was, standing beside Lily beneath the shadow of a large oak tree. The folded paper still rested. Inside his jacket pocket, his fingers brushed against it briefly, and with that simple touch, memories long buried began to surface. 15 years earlier, the air had felt very different. Dry desert wind rolled across a temporary operations base thousands of miles from home. The days had been long, the nights even longer. Ethan had been younger then, carrying responsibilities far beyond his years. General Robert Hayes had not yet worn 4 stars. Back then he was simply Colonel Hayes, respected by everyone who worked with him because he never asked others to carry burdens he would not carry himself. Ethan remembered one particular evening. The sun had been setting beyond distant hills, painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. Most of the camp had settled into its usual routine. Generators hummed softly. Radios crackled in the background. Men and women wrote letters home beneath portable lights. Ethan had been sitting alone outside a communications trailer when Hayes walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You always find the quietest spot around," Hayes had said with a smile. Ethan accepted the coffee. "Someone has to." Hayes laughed. "That is why I like you, Walker. You never compete to be the loudest man in the room." They sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes. Neither man felt the need to fill every moment with words. Finally, Hayes stared toward the darkening horizon and spoke. "Do you know what people get wrong about leadership?" Ethan shook his head. "They think leadership is about standing in front." Hayes took a slow sip of coffee. "Most of the time it is about standing beside someone when nobody else will." Ethan never forgot those words. Years later, he would repeat them to Lily whenever life became difficult. That evening, the conversation continued long after sunset. They spoke about family, about responsibility, about the sacrifices people quietly carried. Hayes told stories about his wife. Ethan shared photographs of the daughter he had not yet met, a baby who would arrive several months later. Somewhere during those conversations, respect became friendship. Friendship became brotherhood. Then came the moment Ethan remembered most clearly. Hayes reached into his field notebook and tore out a sheet of paper. He wrote something quickly before folding it. "Keep this," he said. Ethan frowned. "Why?" Hayes smiled. "Because someday, I might need you to remember something important." Ethan slipped the paper into his pocket. "And what is that?" Hayes looked up at the stars beginning to appear above them. His voice became unusually serious. "If my journey ends before yours, promise me you will come say goodbye." Ethan studied him for a moment. "That is a strange request." "Maybe." Hayes smiled again. "But promise me anyway." Ethan extended his hand. "You have my word." 15 years later, standing outside a funeral where he was not welcome, Ethan still intended to keep that promise. And just beyond the cemetery gates, the convoy carrying one of the most powerful officers in the United States military finally came to a stop. The arrival of the convoy transformed the atmosphere almost instantly. Uniformed personnel moved with renewed urgency. Senior officers adjusted their jackets. Members of the press stepped closer to the designated viewing area. Whatever attention had briefly drifted toward Ethan and Lily disappeared as everyone focused on the distinguished guests stepping from the vehicles. Lily stood on her toes, trying to see over the crowd gathered near the entrance. "Is that the important person they were waiting for?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Looks like it." Before he could say more, another figure approached. Captain Reed Sullivan moved across the lawn with the confidence of a man responsible for keeping every detail of the ceremony under control. His uniform was immaculate. His expression was professional, but increasingly irritated. He stopped several feet from Ethan and folded his arms. "Sir, we have already had this conversation." Ethan met his gaze calmly. "Yes, we have." Sullivan glanced toward the ceremony, then back at Ethan. "This is not the place to make a statement." "I am not making a statement." "Then why are you still here?" Ethan remained silent for a moment. The breeze shifted through the trees above them. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Softly. Finally he answered. "I came because I promised someone I would." Sullivan let out a quiet sigh. "You keep saying that." "Because it is true." The captain looked unconvinced. To him, Ethan appeared to be another veteran seeking recognition during a high-profile event. He had seen similar situations before. People claiming connections. People exaggerating stories. People hoping to stand close to history. "Do you have any documentation?" Sullivan asked. Ethan slowly reached into his jacket. For a brief moment the captain seemed relieved. Perhaps this would finally resolve everything. Ethan pulled out the folded paper. The edges were worn. The crease lines had softened with time. Sullivan accepted it carefully and unfolded it. His eyes moved across the page. Then he frowned. There was no official seal. No government letterhead. No signature block from military command. Just a short handwritten note. Sullivan read it twice. Then a third time. "This does not prove anything," he said. Ethan nodded. "I know. Anyone could have written this." "Maybe." Sullivan stared at him in disbelief. "Then why carry it for 15 years? Ethan's eyes drifted toward the distant casket once again. "Because the man who gave it to me mattered." For the first time, Sullivan noticed something unusual. Ethan never spoke about himself. Not once. Every answer pointed back to someone else. Every response carried respect rather than resentment. Yet the captain's responsibility remained unchanged. "I cannot allow you inside." "I understand. Then I need you to leave the property." Lily looked up at her father, concern filling her eyes. But Ethan simply folded the note and returned it to his pocket. "No," he said quietly. The single word surprised Sullivan. It was not angry. It was not defiant. It was simply firm. Ethan stood exactly where he was. Calm. Respectful. Unmoving. The captain's jaw tightened. Nearby officers began paying attention. A few guests turned to watch. The tension remained polite, but unmistakable. Then, from the far side of the cemetery, a sudden ripple spread through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Someone important had just stepped from the lead vehicle, and within seconds, every carefully planned detail of the morning was about to take an unexpected turn. The ripple of attention spread across the cemetery like a sudden change in weather. Conversations faded into whispers. Officers standing near the main walkway straightened instinctively. Reporters lifted cameras higher. The distinguished guest who had arrived was General Michael Donovan, one of the most respected military leaders in the country. His record was legendary. His presence alone carried weight. Yet something unusual happened the moment he stepped from the vehicle. Instead of moving directly toward the front row where officials waited to greet him, Donovan paused. His eyes swept across the crowd slowly, deliberately, as if searching for someone. Captain Sullivan noticed it immediately. He quickly adjusted his jacket and moved toward the arriving general. Other officers followed. Protocol demanded a formal welcome. Behind them, Ethan remained near the gate with Lily beside him. Neither of them attempted to draw attention. Neither expected anything to change. Lily looked toward the arriving officers and then back at her father. "That is the important man?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded. "Yes." "Do you know him?" Ethan hesitated for a second. "A long time ago, our paths crossed." Lily's eyes widened slightly. "Really?" Before Ethan could answer, Sullivan returned with renewed determination. The arrival of a senior leader had only increased his concern. The last thing he wanted was an unresolved situation near the entrance. "Sir," he said firmly, "this has gone on long enough." Ethan met his gaze calmly. "I am not causing any trouble. That is not the issue." Sullivan lowered his voice. We have very important guests arriving. I noticed. Then please do not make this more difficult. Ethan glanced briefly toward the ceremony. The flag-covered casket remained at the center of the gathering. For a moment, his expression softened. I have no intention of making anything difficult. Sullivan exhaled sharply. He was running out of patience. Around them, a few nearby attendees had begun paying attention. Some exchanged curious glances. Others quietly assumed Ethan must have done something wrong. Appearances often led people to quick conclusions. A worn jacket, an unfamiliar face, no visible credentials. It was easy to make assumptions. Then something unexpected happened. Lily noticed a small object protruding from the inside pocket of her father's jacket. Dad, what is that? She asked. Ethan looked down. The corner of a circular metal case had become visible. Carefully, he removed it. The silver surface showed signs of age. Lily stared at it with curiosity. I have never seen that before. Ethan opened the case slowly. Inside rested a metal unlike any she had seen. It was not flashy. It carried no gemstones or elaborate decoration. Yet the engraving was precise and dignified. A small insignia sat at its center. Lily leaned closer. What does it mean? Ethan studied the metal quietly. It reminds me of people who believe character mattered more than recognition. Did General Hayes give it to you? Ethan smiled faintly, but did not answer. Nearby, one of the older veterans sitting on the bench caught sight of the insignia. His eyes widened. He immediately stood. His friend followed his gaze. Both men stared at the metal in stunned silence. Neither said a word. Neither looked away. Because for the first time that morning, someone had seen a clue that suggested the quiet father near the gate was not who everyone assumed he was. The two older veterans remained frozen for several seconds. One of them finally stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the insignia inside Ethan's metal case. Where did you get that? He asked quietly. Ethan closed the case halfway. A long time ago. The veteran swallowed hard. That emblem belongs to a unit most people have never even heard of. His friend nodded slowly. I have only seen it once before. Captain Sullivan immediately turned toward them. You know what it is? The older man hesitated. I know enough to understand that someone does not receive that recognition by accident. Sullivan looked back at Ethan, uncertainty creeping into his expression for the first time all morning. Yet before he could ask another question, movement near the main ceremony area drew everyone's attention. General Michael Donovan had stopped walking. Senior officials waiting to greet him appeared confused. One senator extended a hand. Donovan acknowledged him politely, but continued scanning the crowd. His eyes moved across rows of chairs, past uniformed officers, past members of the media, and toward the outer edge of the cemetery. Toward the gate. Toward Ethan. Lily noticed it first. Dad, she whispered. I think he is looking this way. Ethan followed her gaze. His expression remained calm, but something changed in his eyes. Recognition. Across the lawn, Donovan took several steps in their direction. A colonel accompanying him said something quietly. Donovan barely seemed to hear it. More officers fell in a step behind him, unsure why the schedule had suddenly changed. The carefully planned ceremony began drifting off course. Captain Sullivan straightened immediately. Assuming the general was approaching to address the disruption, he moved forward to intercept him. General Donovan, Sullivan said respectfully. I apologize for this situation. We are handling it. Donovan slowed. Handling what? Sullivan gestured toward Ethan. An individual refusing to leave a restricted area. Donovan's eyes shifted past the captain. The moment he saw Ethan clearly, he stopped walking altogether. Silence settled over the nearby crowd. Even the reporters seemed to sense that something unusual was happening. Donovan stared for several seconds. Ethan stared back. Neither man spoke. Then something remarkable happened. The four-star general's stern expression softened. Not with amusement. Not with surprise. With recognition. Genuine recognition. Ethan Walker, Donovan said quietly. The words carried farther than he intended. Several nearby officers exchanged puzzled looks. Sullivan blinked. You know him, sir? Donovan never took his eyes off Ethan. Know him, he repeated. The general took another step forward. I have been looking for him all morning. A murmur spread through the crowd. Reporters lowered their cameras, confused. Veterans sitting nearby leaned forward. Lily looked up at her father with wide eyes. Dad, she whispered. Ethan said nothing. He simply stood with the same quiet dignity he had carried all day. Donovan continued approaching. Every step seemed to deepen the mystery. Because the most powerful person at the ceremony was no longer focused on politicians, dignitaries, or military leadership. He was walking directly toward the single father whom everyone else had tried to remove. The cemetery seemed to hold its breath as General Donovan continued walking toward Ethan. Every conversation had faded. Every camera had stopped moving. Even the wind felt quieter among the rows of flags and memorial stones. Captain Sullivan stood frozen, unsure whether to step aside or remain in place. Donovan made the decision for him. "Captain," he said calmly, "give us a moment." Sullivan immediately stepped back. "Yes, sir." Donovan stopped directly in front of Ethan. For a second, neither man spoke. Years seemed to pass silently between them. Then the general extended his hand. Ethan accepted it. The handshake was brief, but it carried the weight of old respect. "It has been too long," Donovan said. Ethan nodded. "It has." Lily looked back and forth between them in amazement. "Dad, you really know him." A faint smile appeared on Donovan's face. "Your father and I knew the same remarkable man." Lily glanced toward the flag-covered casket. "General Hayes?" "Yes," Donovan answered gently. "One of the finest men I have ever served with." The crowd watched in stunned silence. Reporters exchanged confused looks. Several senior officers appeared completely bewildered. None of them had expected the ceremony's most honored guest to walk past every dignitary in attendance to greet a quiet single father standing near the gate. Donovan studied Ethan carefully. "I was told you might not come." Ethan looked toward the casket. "I gave my word." Donovan nodded slowly. "That sounds like you." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Donovan reached into the inside pocket of his dress uniform. His movement immediately drew attention from everyone nearby. He removed a sealed envelope. The paper showed signs of age. The edges were slightly worn, yet it had clearly been protected with great care. Donovan held it respectfully in both hands. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized the handwriting before he even saw the name. "He left this with me years ago," Donovan said quietly. "He instructed me to deliver it personally if you ever appeared here today." The crowd grew even quieter. Captain Sullivan felt his stomach tighten. The older veterans standing nearby exchanged astonished glances. Lily stared at the envelope as if it contained the answer to a mystery she had only just begun to understand. Ethan accepted it carefully. His hands remained steady, but emotion flickered briefly across his face. "I did not know this existed," he said. Donovan nodded. "Very few people did." Ethan looked down at the envelope. Across the front, written in unmistakable handwriting, were only 4 simple words. "For Ethan Walker." Nothing else. No rank. No title. No decoration. Just a name. The name of a man who had spent the entire morning being treated like he did not belong. Donovan looked toward the ceremony area and then back at Ethan. "There is something else you need to know." His voice carried just enough for nearby officers to hear. General Hayes gave very specific instructions regarding today's service. The surrounding crowd leaned forward. Curiosity spread across every face. Because whatever was written inside that envelope, and whatever instructions General Hayes had left behind, were clearly important enough to alter the course of the entire funeral. For several long seconds, Ethan simply stared at the envelope in his hands. Around him, the cemetery had fallen completely silent. Even those too far away to hear the conversation could sense that something significant was unfolding. Lily stepped closer to her father and gently touched his arm. "Are you going to open it?" she asked softly. Ethan looked down at her, then back at the familiar handwriting. "I think it is time." Carefully, he broke the seal. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with age. He unfolded it slowly. General Donovan remained beside him, standing with the quiet respect usually reserved for moments of profound importance. Ethan's eyes moved across the first lines. Almost immediately, emotion appeared in his expression. Not dramatic emotion, not tears, something deeper. The kind of feeling carried by memories, loyalty, and promises kept across many years. Donovan looked toward the gathered crowd. "With your permission," he said quietly, "I believe everyone should hear what he wrote." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Donovan accepted the letter and turned toward the assembled guests. Officers, veterans, family members, reporters, and public officials all watched attentively. The general unfolded the page and began reading. "If you are hearing these words, then I am no longer here to say them myself. There is one person I hope will attend this day, though I suspect he will try to remain unnoticed. That would be Ethan Walker. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Donovan continued. Many people know my rank. Many know my accomplishments. Very few know the sacrifices made by others that allowed those accomplishments to exist. Ethan Walker is one of those people. Complete silence followed. Captain Sullivan stood motionless. The older veterans lowered their heads respectfully. Donovan read on. He never asked for recognition. He never sought promotion through influence. He never spoke about his service. Yet throughout the years, whenever character was tested, Ethan proved what true leadership looks like. Not authority, not status. Character. Lily stared at her father in disbelief. She had always known him as the man who packed school lunches, fixed broken appliances, and worked long hours without complaint. Hearing him described this way felt almost unreal. Donovan continued reading. If Ethan comes to say goodbye, then he does not arrive as a guest. He arrives as family. He belongs closer to me than any title, position, or public office represented here today. Make certain he is welcomed accordingly. Several people visibly reacted. Some lowered their eyes. Others glanced toward Ethan with entirely new understanding. Captain Sullivan felt his face grow warm. Every assumption he had made that morning now weighed heavily on him. Donovan reached the final paragraph. His voice softened. The bravest people are rarely the loudest. Ethan Walker taught me that. If he stands beside my casket on this day, then my final request has been honored. When Donovan finished reading, no one spoke. No one moved. The words seemed to linger in the cool morning air. Then Donovan folded the letter carefully, looked directly at Ethan, and said the words that changed everything. According to his final instructions, your place is not outside the ceremony. Your place is at the front. For a moment, Ethan did not move. The words seemed almost impossible to process. Your place is at the front. All morning, he had stood outside the ceremony. All morning, he had been viewed as someone who did not belong. Yet now, every eye in the cemetery was fixed on him. General Donovan stepped aside and extended his hand toward the main seating area. Come with me. Ethan looked down at Lily. Her eyes were shining with pride. Go, Dad, she whispered. He wanted you there. Ethan smiled softly. Then together, father and daughter followed Donovan across the lawn. The crowd parted without being asked. Veterans who had never met Ethan stood respectfully as he passed. Officers moved aside. Reporters lowered their cameras. Nobody wanted to interrupt the moment. Captain Sullivan remained near the entrance. As Ethan approached, the captain straightened immediately. His face carried genuine regret. Mr. Walker, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Ethan paused. Sullivan looked down briefly before meeting his eyes again. I judged you before I knew your story. Ethan studied him for a moment. Then he offered a small nod. We all do that sometimes. There was no anger in his voice. No bitterness. Only grace. The response seemed to affect Sullivan even more than criticism would have. A few moments later, Ethan and Lily reached the front row. A seat had been prepared beside the family section. Donovan personally guided them there. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The man who had arrived unnoticed was now sitting in the place of highest honor. As the ceremony resumed, speakers shared stories about service, leadership, and sacrifice. Yet many people found themselves watching Ethan instead. Not because he demanded attention, because he never did. The quiet dignity he carried seemed to reflect everything General Hayes had described in his letter. Eventually, the final portion of the service began. The bugle sounded once more across the cemetery. The notes drifted through the cool air, gentle and solemn. Flags moved softly in the breeze. The sunlight finally broke through the clouds above, casting a warm glow across the memorial grounds. Ethan stood beside Lily. In his hand rested the old letter. In his pocket remained the promise he had carried for 15 years. Beside him, General Donovan stood silently. Neither man needed words. The promise had been kept. The request had been honored. The friendship had endured beyond time. Lily slipped her hand into her father's. I think General Hayes would be happy you came, she said. Ethan looked toward the flag-covered casket one last time. A faint smile appeared on his face. I hope so. Silence settled over the cemetery. Not an empty silence. A meaningful one. The kind that follows truth. The kind that follows respect. The kind that reminds people that character is worth more than recognition, and that dignity does not need an audience. Long after the ceremony ended, most people would forget the speeches. Many would forget the officials who attended, but they would remember the quiet father who stood outside the gate, kept his word, and taught everyone there that the strongest honor is not found in rank or status. It is found in loyalty, humility, and the courage to remain true to your promises even when nobody else understands them.